I am currently observing U.S. Navy vessels departing rapidly from Bahrain. It is imperative to grasp the gravity of the situation. This is no longer a drill. The American Embassy in Israel issued an urgent advisory stating unequivocally, evacuate immediately, not tomorrow, not next week, today. Ambassador Mike Hucker instructed staff that those departing must secure flights today, as commercial air services may soon become unavailable. Simultaneously, Iran has launched multiple ballistic missiles targeting U.S. military installations across the Gulf. Key facilities, including Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the largest American military base in the Middle East, headquarters of the U.S. Fifth Fleet in Bahrain, and bases in the UAE and Kuwait, are all under assault. Tragically, one civilian in Abu Dhabi has already been killed by debris from a missile interceptor. Airspace closures have been implemented across Qatar, the UAE, Kuwait, and Bahrain as missiles continue to traverse the skies. Air defense systems are operating continuously, while social media footage captures strikes against U.S. Navy facilities in Bahrain and explosions over Doha. However, these attacks did not occur in isolation. Earlier today, the United States and Israel initiated what they describe as a preemptive strike on Iran, targeting multiple cities including Tehran, Isfahan, Kar, and Kerman. Reports indicate the strikes were not confined to military assets but also aimed at the Iranian leadership, potentially reaching residential areas associated with the supreme leader. The Pentagon has, for weeks, been reinforcing military presence in the region. Two aircraft carrier strike groups, the USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS Gerald R. Ford, have been deployed, supported by over a dozen warships, F-22 stealth fighters, and aerial refueling tankers. This deployment is not symbolic. It is an unmistakable preparation for conflict. President Trump has publicly acknowledged that these operations could result in regime change in Iran, using language such as annihilation and elimination. In parallel, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has declared that any installation assisting the U.S. or Israel constitutes a legitimate target. Strategically, the stakes are immense. 20% of global oil transits the Strait of Hormuz, situated between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. Should Iran elect to close the strait, which it has the capability to do, the resultant oil crisis would eclipse the disruptions of 1973. Oil prices are already rising in anticipation. Crucially, these developments occurred less than 48 hours after Geneva-mediated negotiations between the U.S. and Iran, facilitated by Oman. Both parties initially reported progress on a potential nuclear deal. Yet, within a day, these military actions unfolded. Current reports suggest that the rationale provided by the U.S. administration, namely that Iran is close to acquiring missile capabilities capable of reaching the United States, may be inconsistent with intelligence assessments. Recent leaks indicate that Iran does not possess intercontinental ballistic missile capacity and is not imminently capable of striking the U.S. Conflicting statements from officials further obscure the situation. One envoy claimed Iran was a week away from producing industrial-grade bomb material, while others suggested enrichment activities were not actively underway. Compounding the complexity, the U.S. and Israel previously executed Operation Midnight Hammer in June 2025, reportedly destroying Iranian nuclear facilities at Ford and Isfahan, deep underground sites designed to withstand airstrikes. This raises critical questions. If Iran's nuclear program was already neutralized, what necessitates this renewed military escalation? Meanwhile, China has issued immediate evacuation orders for its citizens in Iran, as well as enhanced security directives in Israel, an unusual move signaling that intelligence predicts significant disruption. Commercial aviation is likewise being affected, with KLM suspending flights to Tel Aviv and the FAA facing urgent decisions on U.S. carriers operating near the Gulf. Iran has described its recent actions as a first wave of attacks, suggesting further escalation. Verified footage shows ballistic missiles striking the naval support activity in Bahrain, the operational hub of the U.S. Fifth Fleet. Air defense systems in the UAE and Qatar intercepted multiple missiles, though some breaches occurred. Explosions have also been reported in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. demonstrating that Iran is sending a clear message to all Gulf states hosting U.S. forces. They are potential targets. Regional responses have been measured but firm. Qatar condemned the strikes as a violation of national sovereignty, and the UAE labeled them a dangerous escalation. These countries, long striving for neutrality between Washington and Tehran, are now being forced to take sides. What remains largely unreported is that U.S. military personnel were quietly evacuated from key positions prior to these strikes. Documentation indicates that hundreds of non-essential staff were withdrawn from Qatar over the preceding week. The Pentagon anticipated Iranian retaliation, understood likely target locations, and allowed operations to continue. Iran's attacks were not spontaneous. Following Operation Midnight Hammer last June, Iran devoted 9 months to rebuilding its missile arsenal. U.S. intelligence agencies monitored this reconstruction, with satellite imagery confirming new missile production facilities coming online in January. Tehran's posture suggested a direct challenge to Washington, daring a renewed confrontation. The timing of these strikes immediately following ostensibly positive Geneva negotiations is striking. Either the talks were never intended to produce a genuine agreement, or one side deliberately undermined the process. Sources familiar with the discussions report that Iran was prepared to compromise on uranium enrichment levels and engage in robust inspection protocols. A framework for a deal appeared to be taking shape until Israeli strikes on Iranian targets preempted finalization. President Trump has framed his objectives as promoting freedom for the Iranian populace while simultaneously threatening the elimination of Iran's Navy and Revolutionary Guard. These goals are inherently contradictory. One cannot advocate for democratic advancement while systematically dismantling a nation's military infrastructure. The Pentagon has maintained detailed contingency plans for Iran since 2003. These plans extend far beyond limited strikes on nuclear facilities and encompass a comprehensive strategy to neutralize Iran's military command structure, naval capabilities, air defenses, and missile production infrastructure. The authorization of the current campaign represents the initiation of this broader strategy. Iran possesses strategic options the U.S. may prefer not to acknowledge. Proxy forces are positioned throughout the Middle East. Hezbollah in Lebanon, equipped with over 150,000 missiles aimed at Israel, militias in Iraq, capable of targeting U.S. forces, and armed groups in Yemen, demonstrating the capacity to strike Saudi and Emirati targets. The potential closure of the Strait of Hormuz presents a particularly acute risk. Iran can achieve this without deploying naval vessels, instead utilizing minefields, shore-based anti-ship missiles, and submarines. Any U.S. attempt to maintain open shipping lanes would require extensive mine-sweeping operations under persistent attack, effectively halting global oil flows. A temporary closure of Hormuz, even for just 2 weeks, would rapidly deplete the strategic petroleum reserve. Domestic fuel rationing would become a distinct possibility, while U.S. gasoline prices could skyrocket to unprecedented levels. This scenario is compounded by the fact that Iran has spent 2 decades developing hardened, dispersed military assets, redundant command systems, and autonomous operational procedures designed to withstand American airstrikes. Iran's military experience is considerable. Unlike Iraq in 2003, whose forces collapsed within weeks, Iran endured an 8-year conflict with Iraq in the 1980s and maintained operational cohesion. Its forces are trained to sustain combat operations even under significant attrition. Further complicating the situation, Iran's exiled Crown Prince, Reza Pahlavi, has issued a public appeal calling on the Iranian military to side with opposition forces to facilitate regime change. He offered immunity to security personnel who lay down their arms. This signal aligns with the broader U.S. objective of regime change. Historical precedent underscores the risks of such an approach. Previous U.S. interventions intended to reshape Middle Eastern governments, most notably Iraq, have produced lasting instability, the rise of non-state actors such as ISIS, and protracted humanitarian crises. Iran, with a population 3 times that of Iraq and a sophisticated military infrastructure, presents a far more complex operational environment. The immediate military calculus is sobering. The U.S. carrier strike groups, the Abraham Lincoln and Gerald R. Ford, each carrying approximately 5,000 personnel and dozens of aircraft, are positioned in waters where Iran has invested heavily in asymmetric warfare capabilities. These include anti-ship ballistic missiles, coastal cruise missiles, swarming fast attack craft, and naval mines. These measures are designed specifically to challenge superior conventional forces in confined maritime environments. Moreover, the U.S. Navy has not engaged a near-peer maritime adversary since the Second World War. Recent conflicts have largely involved opponents with minimal naval capacity. Iran, by contrast, has prepared extensively for precisely this scenario. The potential damage to or loss of an aircraft carrier would produce catastrophic political and military consequences in Washington, generating immense pressure for large-scale retaliatory action and escalating the conflict into a broader regional war. The situation is further complicated by Israel's sustained pressure on the United States to completely neutralize Iran's nuclear program and military infrastructure. This has been a long-standing objective, pursued over the past 15 years. The current administration appears willing to act decisively. However, internal Pentagon assessments emphasize that such an operation is neither quick nor simple. Military planners note that a comprehensive campaign would require weeks, possibly months, of sustained airstrikes targeting hundreds of locations, many of which are fortified or underground, and in some cases requiring multiple strikes to guarantee destruction. Throughout this campaign, Iran would be capable of retaliatory operations. When President Trump speaks of annihilation and elimination, he is not merely employing rhetorical flourish. He is preparing the American public for a scale of military engagement not seen since the early phases of the Iraq War in 2003 and potentially of even greater magnitude. Yet the central concern is what follows such a campaign. Even assuming the U.S. achieves its immediate objectives, destroying Iran's military capabilities and instigating regime change, the question of governance and stability remains unresolved. The opposition is fragmented, the exiled community disconnected from current domestic realities, and Iran's population of 90 million is complex, educated, and deeply integrated into regional networks. Past interventions, notably in Iraq and Libya, demonstrate the difficulties of post-conflict reconstruction. Removing a government may be operationally straightforward. Establishing a stable successor state is extraordinarily challenging. Iran's larger population, deeper societal structures, and regional influence across Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and Gaza significantly increase the risk of widespread instability if the regime collapses. Externally, global powers are observing closely. Russia and China are unlikely to intervene militarily, recognizing the risk of direct conflict with the United States. Nevertheless, they may provide diplomatic support, supply arms, and assist Iran in evading sanctions, potentially cementing a strategic alignment with Moscow and Beijing. This would further complicate the long-term geopolitical landscape. Economically, the implications are immediate and severe. Oil prices have already spiked, and a protracted conflict would drive inflation, risking recession in the United States. The Federal Reserve would be forced into difficult decisions, balancing inflation control with sustaining economic growth. Crucially, the endgame remains ambiguous. The administration has not clearly defined what constitutes success. Is the goal the destruction of Iran's nuclear facilities, regime change, or the complete dismantling of its military capabilities? Each objective entails distinct levels of commitment and exposure to risk. The immediate horizon is critical. Iran has declared that its recent strikes represent only a first wave. Should additional attacks occur, the U.S. would be compelled to respond, initiating a cycle of action and counteraction that could rapidly escalate into a broader conflict. Intelligence assessments indicate that Iran would be expected to respond robustly to maintain credibility both domestically and regionally. The question remains whether any party has a viable strategy to de-escalate before hostilities spiral further. At present, the outlook is concerning. Diplomatic, economic, and military factors converge in a manner that offers little room for a swift or orderly resolution. Observers and policymakers alike must confront the prospect that this situation may deteriorate into a protracted and complex regional crisis with profound global ramifications.